Okay, welcome back to Math Explained. So this video is all about factoring, specifically factoring quadratics. And if you recall, a quadratic is something that has as its highest exponent a 2. So like ax squared plus bx plus c. A and b and c are just numbers. Okay, so if we're going to solve a quadratic equation, so let's say we have like y equals x squared minus 1. Okay, the first thing we need to know is what a solution actually is. Like, what does that even look like? And the way it is this. Okay, oops. So here's our little plane. So we've got our x and our y axis. So what I'm looking for, so if I graph this one right here, this y equals x squared minus 1, what this looks like on a graph is this. So here's 1, here's 1, here's 1. So it's like this. Pretend that that's straight. So it crosses the x-axis there and there. So that's what that is. So when we ask for a solution, the solution is where it crosses the x-axis. So these two things here, those are solutions. Okay. Well, that's all fine and good, but we don't really want to have to graph something every time we want to solve it. Luckily, we don't have to. So if you're at the x-axis, like right along this, your y is not up or down, your y is 0, right? So if our y is 0, then what we can do is we can go back to our original equation, so we have x squared minus 1, and we can say, okay, well, it makes sense then that all we have to do is set this thing equal to 0. And then whatever x makes that a 0, that's a solution. So in this case, I don't have to factor or do anything funky because I could just go ahead and add a 1 to each side. So plus 1 here, I get x squared equals 1. I'm going to square root both sides to undo the square, and I get x equals plus or minus 1. So in other words, x equals either a positive 1 or a negative 1. Which makes sense, right? Because this is negative 1, this is positive 1. Okay, so that's for like a simple one like this, x squared minus 1. But let's say you have a little bit more complicated one. Let's say that you have f of x, which is just y, right? So f of x equals x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay. So this one, we can't just subtract the 6 and solve it. We have to actually factor it. So a long time ago, when you were little and there were big numbers, you had to, like, say you had something like, I don't know, 42. And your teacher would come along and they would go, okay, well, break that down into the little factors. Okay, so that's like the numbers that multiply together to make 42. So you have 1 and 42, you have 2 and 21, you have 3 and 7, that kind of stuff. Those kind of things. Well, the same is true for this. You can break it into something like that. It'll be an x plus or minus something and an x plus or minus something. But there's a way to go about doing this that makes it easier. So I'm going to move this 42 thing out of here. Okay, so the first thing is, if we remember back to the very first slide before we even started, the generic form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. A, b, and c are just numbers. They're not variables. They're just numbers. They're not going to change within that one equation, right? So what they are then is those are these numbers here. They're constant. So okay, we need to know that. So what I like to do is I usually like to write things down in steps because then I can keep it straight. So let me come over here. Steps. Well, the first thing we do, especially if we're going to solve it, is, we realize that in order to be a solution, the x has to cause the whole function to equal 0, right? So our first step then is to set it equal to 0. Set equal to 0. So we come up here, equals 0. Let me get these out of the way because I'm going to find those, but we don't know what those are yet. Okay, step 2. We need our a, b, and our c. So find a, b, c. Well, our a in this case is a 1 because there's nothing there, right? So a is 1, b is 5, and c is 6, right? 1, 5, 6. Okay, so we're good with that. The next step is we want to multiply a and c together. So multiply a times c. So I come over here, a times c. In this case, it's 1 times 6. So that gives me a 6. My 6 is positive. That's important. My next step is I'm going to factor that a times c. In this case, 6 doesn't have a lot of factors, but it has a couple, right? So we have 1 and 6. We have 2 and 3. Okay. Our next step is we're going to pick the factor pair that adds up to our b value. And we have a little bit of stuff involved in that. So pick factor pair. Factor pair that adds to b. So in this case, our b is a 5. So if I look across here, so I have 1 plus 6, that would be 7. So if I put a little plus there, that would be 7. So that's not it. 2 plus 3 is 5. So that's the one I want. But let me make a little note on this. So our sign out front of the 6 is positive, right? This is not negative. That means if it's positive, both of these numbers in the factor pair have to be the same sign. So 2 times 3, like both of them positive, equals 6, but also negative 2 times negative 2 equals positive 6. Now the sign that the way we figure out what sign to use is we look at our b, because we're adding these up to make b in the first place. So if b is negative, then, so whatever the sign of b is going to be the larger number in your factor pair. So sign of larger factor. In this case, our b is also positive. That means we're going to keep both of these numbers as positive in our factor pairs. And the one that adds up to 5 is 2 plus 3. So that's our factor pair that we're going to use. Now there are a couple more steps that we would use. So actually 3 of them. So the steps, I'm going to skip 6 through 8 because a is 1, sorry. Because a equals 1. There are some other steps, these 6 through 8, and I'll show you on the next problem. But okay, so then our next step is to rewrite. So step 9, rewrite or regroup. So okay, so instead of writing it x squared plus 5x plus 6, these are the factors. So we would write them like this: x plus 2, x plus 3. Now this is our same equation. It's still equal to 0, so I'm going to keep that there. And then step 10, I want to solve each factor. Solve each. So because anything times 0 is 0, if I make this one a 0, then the whole thing is 0. If I make this one a 0, the whole thing is 0. So what I do then is I solve, because either one of those will be the answer, or actually both of those are the answer, right? So I separate them out. So x plus 2 equals 0. Because remember, I'm looking for whatever x would make this a 0. So to solve for this one, I subtract 2 from both sides. So my x equals negative 2. So that's one of my answers. And on this one, I subtract 3 from both sides. So x equals negative 3. And that's my second answer. So notice, like one point that I didn't note before, notice that we can expect to have two answers. And the reason for that is our highest exponent in our equation is 2. So whatever your highest exponent is, that's how many answers you can expect to have. Okay, or possible solutions. You might have, this is just a side note, in this one, this is y equals x squared. This barely touches the x-axis and goes. This actually still has two solutions. It's just that both of the solutions are 0. So that's like different. Okay. So let's see, I think I'm going to make this a second video because this video is running along. But so I wanted to do the case for when our a is not a 1. So I'm going to do that next. So this is just part 1 of factoring, but this is how you do it if your a is a 1. So part 2, our a is going to not be a 1.